great themes, the themes from your great religious epics were expressed through puppetry and taken very seriously, so that the understanding that art is representing an idea and that the tangible object is just a bridge between the idea and the viewer, and is there for you to interpret.
Not long ago, I wrote a book about my life on the creative edge. As a composer, improviser, and producer, I knew how creativity worked for me, but now I want to know more. So I'm looking for answers, for some real-world insight and inspiration. Today, I'm sitting down with dancer and choreographer Mary-Jean Cowell. I'm going to ask her to fill in the blank. Creativity is?
In general, I think a work of art starts with the idea, and I see that as kind of very much a modernist or a 20th century concept, that instead of starting with a predetermined vocabulary of expression or a predetermined idea about what the form of the product will be, you're saying, what is the idea that I'm most interested in, and therefore, what is the vocabulary, whether it's sound or movement or paint or whatever, that's most appropriate, or how do I use that medium in the most appropriate way to express that idea.
So when you talk about it starts with an idea, I understand that. Are there things that you find helpful when you're trying to come up with that original idea?
Well, where ideas come from can be so many different places, and can in my experience, come on you at so many different times. When I was working professionally in New York, I used to go to the art galleries a lot, just to see what visual artists were doing, because I felt that although I was using three-dimensional space, even people that were working two-dimensionally were dealing with compositions in ways that interested me. How do you pull focus to that part of the canvas or whatever? And if they are working as sculptors, you know, how do you pull focus to that, and what makes it interesting? Or, that was often my question, you know, this is interesting to me, and why, and how does it work? Just kind of deconstructing the process of what makes me look at this or holds my interest in it. Less so than maybe what is the specific content of this work in terms of an idea. And again, too, I think maybe because I work in movement, which is nonverbal, I'm really open to the viewer having a very personal response to the work that may be different from mine.
The puppets, in a way, are a medium between the idea and the communication of it. So is that really the way you look at whatever work you're doing, as the idea is sort of where the work comes from, and then yet you're using it to communicate?
Well, I'll admit I'm really, bottom line, I guess, influenced by Suzanne K. Longer's sense of that. Feeling and Form is the name of the book, and she's one of the few Western aestheticians that deals with dance, which is one reason why I think dancers are more likely to be familiar with her work. And she talks about every art form having a specific expressive intent. And her idea is that any art form is a form of feeling, a way of making feeling tangible. So some ideas will be best expressed in music, will be made tangible in music. Some will be made tangible in movement, some will be made tangible as a painting, some as a poem, but that essentially what you got there is the statement of the idea in that medium. And that is the bridge. Now, how specific that is and how much the audience receives exactly the same feeling, I think varies with the medium. But I think poetry is a good example because we're using words which we use in daily life in a very different way. We have agreed upon meanings, and the whole point of poetry is often to wrench our sense of what that word means by putting it in a different context, and therefore seeing, oh, these words aren't saying what they might if I rearranged them and we said them across the breakfast table. So that even though words are being used, they are articulating or putting into feeling something that they wouldn't normally. And I think that, so that's always the bridge, I think, is making tangible something that you're feeling or something that, some idea that you may be able to put that idea in words to a degree, but the more that it's absolutely something that needs to be expressed in another medium, the more the actual experience of that idea is in the perception of that form.
You mentioned improvisation as part of your creative process, that you sometimes will improvise as you're trying to make sense of your ideas and try and see how they fit together. I don't really know, do you ever perform improvisation?
Oh yeah, in fact, last year and the year before, our music director came up with an idea, influenced actually by Cage, in which we had 3 musicians improvising live and 3 dancers. But we did have a structure, but it was just kind of tripartite, and the dancers decided among themselves certain very loose thematic ideas we would use in those 3 sections, and the musicians decided among themselves that what they were going to do in section 1, 2, and 3, and yet there was a sense that we would be aware of each other, and they were certainly watching us. And we were listening to them. I love improvising in performance, and I have done it more than once. In fact, you and I did a piece in which a lot of it was semi-improvised. Yeah, I had thematic material for the different sections that was based on your ideas, both musically and things that were in the words when they were songs. Yeah, I love working that way. It's very freeing because, first of all, there's the excitement of something new happening, and that discovery process. And I also think there's less concern about technique. You know, if you have this set piece, you know this is coming up in that section, and you want to do it exactly this way, so you can get distracted from the flow of the piece by thinking about that.
I mean, there's a lot of different ways to improvise. So what are you thinking about, and what are you drawing upon material that exists? Are you trying to assemble ideas that you've already got?
In that particular case, because I had heard the music and your ideas, and I had the words also, so I made specific choices about the kinds of material I would start from in different sections, and some of them were more structured than others. I remember in a section that was called or took place in an elevator. That was a lot of the imagery. And we also decided it would be confined by the lighting to a small space. So I remember thinking, okay, I've got to be interesting in this small space for a while. So I decided I would use a gestural sequencing that I know from a modern Japanese movement technique, and I would start from those gestures, but I would freely use the rest of my body insofar as space permitted, and I would feel free to go away from those gestures too, but I would kind of try to hover improvisationally around that.
Yeah, so that's really a sense of kind of structure, really.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, that's a great question. What does structure have to do with your work? And does it come in later? Is it the start?
To me, it's really the whole form is content thing. Structure is part of this tangible form. I don't have to know from the beginning what the form is. I'm thinking now in terms of free verse versus writing a sonnet. You know, if you write a sonnet, you know how many lines it's going to have and which lines are going to rhyme. And your challenge is to take that pre-existing form and not make it seem like a straitjacket for the idea. Somehow find a way to embody your idea in that form that's fresh and unpredictable and individual. Whereas if you're writing the so-called free verse, it isn't that it's formless, and this would be true of the modern dance composition too. You're finding the right form to express that idea. And so I don't usually start out with an idea that it's going to have this particular form. It's more about that thematic material, those movements that I want to develop, and then finding ways that make sense in terms of the idea I'm working with. Now, it makes a big difference, I think, if I start out with a piece of music that I'm going to use versus making the movement and then finding the music, or making the movement and then having it written. That's such a luxury, you know. But because inevitably, if you have the music and you don't want to cut it in ways that violate the music itself, then you already have certain forms in place. The direction of dance in the last probably 15 years has been to make it more and more overtly athletic, in the sense that the audience doesn't have to see the finer points. The incredible physical facility required to leap into the air and turn 3 times before you land. And it used to be that if you got your foot up to your shoulder when I was in New York, that was high, you know, you were doing well. And now, so many dancers, their legs go higher than that. There's also a great deal of emphasis on speed and externalized energy, and I think part of that may be the influence of pop culture. You know, we're used to fast cuts now. You know, things change rapidly. We jump inside, outside, we jump from one dancer to 16, and so that stimulation, we get conditioned to that, so it's much harder to watch something that may say, okay, you've got to get in this moment and slow down, listen, watch, and something will happen. So those are the kind of things that people readily understand as expressing training and skill. But that's not necessarily where the essence of dance as an art form is, because if that's what it's about, then why not watch the Olympics? There's been so much stress on that kind of obvious virtuosity, or a physical virtuosity, versus a performance virtuosity, in which the challenge is to make raising your arm so riveting that the audience has to watch it.